Hey everyone, it's Bradley Rosa with the Broward Bar Buzz, and today I'm here with Todd Michaels of the Haggard Law Firm. Welcome, Todd.
Thanks, Bradley. It's great to be here with you.
So I really enjoyed talking off camera, and I really think people need to get to know who you are. So who are you and what do you do?
We can't just play back the off-camera conversation because that was a good conversation.
It was a great conversation, but maybe the language could have been a little colorful at times.
That's fair. So my name's Todd Michaels. I'm a partner at the Haggard Law Firm in Coral Gables. I've been practicing for 21 years, started off as a public defender. And right now I'm also the president of the Florida Justice Association. So for those that don't know, the FJA is the trade group, probably the largest consumer and plaintiffs lawyer trade group in the state of Florida. What we really exist for is protecting access to courts, protection of the Seventh Amendment, fighting tort reform, things of that nature, making sure that consumers have a fair deal in Florida, that they have access to courts when something goes wrong.
Super important, because I think when you spoke a little legalese there with the plaintiff, this and that. So basically in English, what you're saying is you support the lawyers that help people when they get hurt or something goes sideways.
Sure, both the lawyers and the clients.
And the clients, right. Obviously, it's the clients. It's ultimately about the clients.
Right. And we all forget sometimes that this stuff doesn't always translate well to English. But one of the key hallmarks, one of the things that the founding fathers thought was important to protect when they went back and write the Bill of Rights was the right to a jury trial in a civil case. And we take it for granted here, right? We all know criminal case, civil case, you've got a court hearing or trial, you're trying it to a jury of your peers. They're the people who hear the evidence. They're the people who are in the best position to decide how you resolve this dispute. I had sorry, I'm a little dry. I had an amazing experience a few years back, probably 10, 12 years ago now, where our firm hosted an exchange lawyer from China. Obviously, it was a bit of a different geopolitical climate at that time. But I took him to court with me for a morning calendar call and wanted him to see a trial. And at some point, we're in it. It's like the most boring trial you could ever imagine, like a construction defect sinkhole case. And he's staring in rapt attention at the six people sitting in the box wearing a t-shirt or a pair of jeans and a jacket. And at some point he looks at me and goes, "Who are they?" Which we take for granted.
Yeah.
I said, "They're the jury." And he said, what do they do? And I said, "Well, they decide the case." And he sort of paused and then looked at me and went, "They're just normal people." And for me, even as someone who relies on juries, that moment was so striking because we take it for granted, right? You hear it from the time you're a little kid. You have a right to a trial by jury. You watch any drama and they're...
By your peers.
Right, by your peers.
By your peers.
You watch any drama on TV and there's six people sitting there paying attention. But what they do is so important, right? And it's the difference between us and a country like China, where if you have a dispute, first of all, you're likely not getting into a court. But then if you do, some government functionary is going to tell you how you resolve that dispute. Seeing it through his eyes, that this is amazing, right? It's the ultimate democracy. No matter what the government does, no matter who's in power, no matter what they try to restrict, at the end of the day, it's those six people who are going to hear the case, we're going to hear the evidence, and they're just ordinary people. To me, it is the ultimate American thing. But the problem is we live in a world where there's a lot of special interests. There's a lot of people trying to protect themselves. So there's sort of in Washington or in Tallahassee, there's this false equivalency that we, representing the plaintiffs' lawyers, are a special interest, and the people on the other side representing the Chamber of Commerce or the insurance industry, they're a special interest. And I think it's really a false equivalency, and here's why. What they're trying to do is change the playing field. What they're trying to do is have rules and laws put in place that ensure that they want to be able to act with impunity to supply their products on the open market, or worse, for insurance companies, they want to be able to sell people a product guaranteeing that they're going to be there for them when something goes wrong. But then they want all these rules in place to make sure that when something goes wrong, they can keep as much of their money as possible, whether that's caps on damages so that a jury can't award what they believe to be a fair value for the case, or immunity for certain types of lawsuits where a company or a corporation or a product can kill you and you can't bring a lawsuit in the first place. All we're looking to do, we're not a special interest. We stand in the breach for those clients, and we all know it's going to happen, right? Terrible things are going to happen, whether it's the person who lives in the next Surfside building that is going to collapse when they're sleeping, or someone who's going to be stopped at a red light, minding their own business, when a commercial truck where the driver's been driving for 15 hours and snoozes off and hits them from behind and they're paralyzed. Those people don't know that they're going to need the civil justice system one day. Most people don't even know that it's really a thing, where there's literally people in Tallahassee whose sole purpose is trying to get laws passed that prevent access to courts when something happens. And a lot of those people right now, might be people who, without knowing that they need the civil justice system or might need the civil justice system, are the people who, trial lawyers this and frivolous lawsuits and this, that, and the other. But what we do as the Florida Justice Association is we stand in the breach for them, the people who will someday become our clients, to make sure that when something goes wrong, they have access to justice, they have access to fairness, they have access to full compensation for whatever happens to them. The second part of that, which goes far beyond the individual client, is the other role that trial lawyers are playing is ensuring that there are safety standards in society. If you look at the way that society has changed, 50 years ago, medical standards were very lax. The oversight and regulation that went into making sure that pharmaceuticals that came to market were safe was very lax. Air travel, disasters happen all the time. Automobiles didn't have things like anti-lock brakes and seat belts and airbags and all those things which you take for granted.
Yeah.
None of those things came into existence or became the norm because the company wanted to spend more money making sure that their products were safer. They came into existence, they became the norm because the cost of not doing those things became too high, and that's because when they failed to do things that they could have and should have been doing for safety and somebody died or lost a limb or became paralyzed as a result of it, they were held responsible by a jury. So, the purpose of what the FJA is doing is twofold. We're a group that is, yes, we're a group comprised of lawyers, but what we're actually doing is representing consumers, representing Floridians, making sure that people will have access to court when something goes wrong. And the reason for that is twofold. One, you need people to be adequately compensated when something happens, and here's the reason why. There's basically three ways that things can be dealt with. The first is something goes wrong, someone's horribly hurt or injured or paralyzed, and there's no recourse. They're left to die, they're left to get substandard medical care. Forget about, obviously that's unfair and it's unjust, but it's also un-American, right? We believe in personal responsibility, we believe in repercussions. Second idea is they're just passed on to the taxpayer, and the taxpayer is now responsible for paying for their medical care and all that. Well, that's not particularly fair or just or American either, right? If somebody causes harm to someone else, that person should be responsible for it. The third way it's dealt with is that a jury comes in and they decide, is that person responsible for causing that harm? And if so, they're held personally responsible. And to what extent are they held personally responsible? To the extent to which they caused the damage. And so that's sort of the fundamental reason for the existence of the civil justice system, but it's a system that constantly needs protection because the people for whom it is cheaper to hurt people, the people who don't want to be held responsible when they hurt people, the insurance companies who are profiting by selling policies to people and collecting those premiums, and then we've seen it all over the news now, and I don't want to glorify what happened in New York because I think it's a terrible thing and that's not the way you deal with the problems, but what it does illustrate is there's obviously some perception starting to grow in general society that there is a problem with the business model of insurance companies, that things like denying valid claims or delaying or underpaying valid claims is seen as the norm. And so what we want to do is ensure that that doesn't happen, that when people buy those insurance products and something happens, the insurance company upholds their part of the bargain.
Let me tell you, insurance companies, now let me be cautious. I will say this. I personally have experienced where I went through surgery and it's supposed to be fully covered, but it's a rigmarole for them to cover it. And then the surgeon's sending you, the anesthesiologist, everyone's sending you a bill. You got to pay this, you got to pay that. And we're going to send you to collections. So like, wait a minute, this is supposed to be covered.
Yeah.
I already paid my deductible. Like, and it's like a game with the insurance companies.
So two
it
things.
It seems to me because they make it so difficult.
Two things can be true at the same time, right? Even if they seem somewhat different. And I just can't express enough how disgusted I was when this guy, I believe his name was Brian Thompson, the CEO of what was it? Not Universal Healthcare. United Healthcare was shot and killed on the streets of New York, and people were glorifying it.
It's a terrible thing, obviously.
It's
not the way to
so far
do
beyond the pale, and
right.
it scared me, moreover, of like what's happening in our society, that someone shot down a father in broad daylight, regardless of what his business practice is,
right.
and people are celebrating the shooter. So, I want to just set that out beforehand because I'm disgusted by it, and I don't know how we're in a place where that's normal or acceptable.
Agreed.
But you talk about the rigmarole, and I don't say but to that. You talk about the rigmarole. We see it in Florida all over right now, right? We have skyrocketing auto premiums, skyrocketing home insurance.
Forget
costs.
about homeowners insurance.
Right.
That's a game.
Homeowners in a whole nother world.
Yeah. We can,
Health insurance. And anytime someone's got a valid claim, the first thing the insurance company is looking to do is no, and then delay it as much as they can and then undercut it. And unfortunately, I know we're going to talk about some legislative stuff today. Unfortunately, in 2023, what the Florida Legislature then did is it made it a lot harder for people to hold their own insurance company responsible when their insurance company doesn't uphold their end of the bargain.
It seems like the tendency has been in Tallahassee to really limit or make it difficult for people that have been wronged to find some sort of solution or right justice for being hurt. I mean, that's kind of what I've seen, and over the last at least decade, the changes that they've been pushing through.
So it's not just in Tallahassee. It's actually a nationwide trend. It goes back to the late 1980s, early 1990s, when George W. Bush was starting his ascent through politics in Texas. Karl Rove, who we all came to know years later as his chief strategist, came up with what he called the three-legged stool of Democratic fundraising. And I think, you look at the world now, political alignments are very different than they were 40 years ago. I think that the Democratic Party used to be seen as the populist party. The Republican Party used to be seen as the party of business and Wall Street and the white shoes and all those silk stockings. Right. That's changed over time, right? I don't know where exactly it's going to settle. I think in Tallahassee, the Democratic Party obviously has a very small footprint. You sort of have a factionalized Republican Party, you've got the populist strain of the Republican Party, and then you've got the more traditional strain of the Republican Party. But all over the country, 30 years from now, we'll look back and the political alignments will be different. The world as it existed 40, 45 years ago, Karl Rove did a whole deep dive on Democratic fundraising and created what he called the three-legged stool. The idea was that the three legs of Democratic fundraising were public education, labor unions, and trial lawyers, civil justice system. So they crafted policy, which has really been standard policy of the last 40, 45 years of that old establishment Republican Party, that wasn't geared towards being good policy or serving people well, but was geared towards cutting off Democratic funding mechanisms. So what do those look like? In the realm of education, charter schools. You look at all the money that's been intentionally sucked out of public education, creating a very unequal system, and put into charter schools. That was a way of cutting off money to public education. Right to work, ending labor unions. That was a way of cutting off money to the labor unions. And then tort reform was a way to cut off money to trial lawyers, to the civil justice system, and it was really done for political purposes. So that it's been a nationwide trend. It's been a trend that's been going on for 40, 45 years, maybe more. We've seen a lot of balance in Tallahassee, and part of the reason for that is there's been a recognition in Tallahassee that good people and good legislators really exist in a bipartisan fashion.
Should.
Right? You've got good Democrats and good Republicans, bad Democrats, bad Republicans, and as an organization, what we've tried to do is focus on friends and foes, not red and blue. People who understand civil justice, who understand that these are fundamental rights for consumers, are people that we support, and people who don't are people that we oppose. And what we found is with all the talk sort of nationwide about Florida this and Florida that, in terms of civil justice, Florida's taken a very moderate path. And we certainly have a more viable civil justice system than you've seen in a lot of other states, and certainly a lot of other southern states, a lot of our peer states, our neighboring states. What happened in 2023 was a perfect storm. You had Governor DeSantis, who wanted to be president. You had Paul Renner, who was the Speaker of the House, who was very much a tort reformer, a friend of business, a friend of the insurance industry. And Kathleen Passidomo was the Senate president, who was very similarly situated. DeSantis had just come off the 20-point victory in his gubernatorial reelection. He was riding high. There was a lot of belief that he was going to be the next president, and he was essentially told that the chamber would likely endorse him, but he had to do tort reform, that Florida's civil justice system was out of whack with other states. And so that became a priority, and he tasked the House with that. And what we saw was a bill that was put on a rocket ship and pushed through, where individual legislators, even individual legislators who didn't like it, really didn't have much of a say in the matter. We're told from on high, you are going to vote for this or there will be consequences. And what could consequences mean? A opponent in the primary, money raised against you, money not going to your district. And, one thing about Tallahassee is most legislators come there for the right reason, but they come from different walks of life. So, you've got a farmer from the middle of the state, you've got a mortician from Jacksonville, you've got a doctor from Pensacola, you got a UPS driver from DeLand, and they all have different areas of expertise. We live and die in this world of civil justice, but for those that come from, let's say, a mortician's background or a farmer's background, if there's a bill affecting agriculture, they're going to know a ton more than we are. If there's a bill affecting the civil justice system, they're going to have to rely on who's telling them stuff. And so this bill was fast-tracked. The order kind of came down from on high that you are going to vote for this. And a bill was pushed through that was the largest transfer of money, of power, and of rights from Floridians to the insurance industry that we've ever seen. So what we saw in Florida heading into 2023 was that there was a dual crisis within the civil justice system. Part of that was affordability, and part of it was accountability, meaning premiums were too high, and when something went wrong, the insurance companies were not being held accountable for what happened. The legislature went back and passed a bill which somehow made insurance no more affordable. If anything, we're seeing rates continue to go up.
Extreme.
And less accountable. What does that look like to everyday people? The law in Florida going back to 1893 was such that if somebody paid for an insurance policy, and I want to point out this was all pushed through as tort reform, because when you talk about tort reform, it's about trial lawyers and torts and ambulance chasers. None of this part of the bill was tort reform. There was a huge part of the bill that was contract reform between insurance companies and their policyholders that basically said that while the policyholder still has to honor the contract, pay their premiums, be honest with the insurance company in purchasing it, there's no more repercussions when the insurance company fails to honor the contract. Those aren't tort issues.
Oh, I didn't know that. So these were all laws that came through along with the tort reform?
They were
one big package?
It was called the Omnibus Tort Reform Package. But let me give you an example of what I mean. Back in 1893, the very southern, very conservative Florida Legislature passed a law that if somebody pays premiums to an insurance company and something goes wrong and that insurance company underpays them by even 1 cent, they can not only collect what they're owed under that policy, but they also have a right to recover the attorney's fees that they had to expend to go sue to get what they were entitled to.
Only fair. Only fair,
right?
Yeah.
The legislature, you always know when something goes in the meat grinder and starts getting focus group because you start to hear the same words being echoed over and over again. So these became known in Tallahassee as one-way attorney's fees, that we need to have balance between the insurance company and the policyholders, and there can't be balance because the attorney's fees only happen one way. Well, of course they only happen one way, because if the policyholder doesn't uphold their part of the bargain, if they don't pay their premium, the policy just gets canceled. So, what do you do when the insurance company doesn't? Well, part of this tort reform package was first-party attorney's fees were eliminated. So what does that look like? In the old world, let's say, you got a man and his wife and they're married and they both work and they're 38 years old and they've got 2 little kids and they each have $1 million life insurance policy so that if one of them dies, God forbid, the other one can use that money to make sure their kids' education, to make up for that second income, to make sure they have child
pay
care,
for the house that now
kids.
they're not going to be able to afford the mortgage. Yeah.
So we all lived in a world for all of our lives up until 2023 where, God forbid the wife drops dead, the husband puts his insurance company on notice and they pay him the $1 million out under that policy. Why? Because the ramifications of not doing so were that they were going to have to pay that $1 million plus his attorney's fees that he incurred going after it. But without even casting aspersions, insurance companies are corporations, and corporations have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders to increase profits as much as they can. That's their job. It's not, it's not a sign of whether they're good or bad or indifferent. That's how corporations work. The world as it exists now.
Wait. So you're saying insurance companies, their primary purpose is not to support and help their clients, it's their shareholders?
It is to make money for their shareholders.
Oh, okay.
And that is, if you look up a corporation generally's duties to its shareholders, that's what they are. It's not to make the best product. It's not to help their consumers the best. It is to increase profitability for their shareholders. That is, and in fact, if they don't do that, if they make choices which do not put that first, they could be sued by their shareholders for violating their fiduciary responsibility. So, what happens now? If somebody dies, they have that $1 million policy, you could argue that the insurance company has a duty, as the law has been rewritten, to offer $900,000 or offer $950,000. Because now that puts the ball back in the person's court who just lost their spouse of, am I going to be able to find a lawyer on a contingency, I guess, who's going to be able to take a case for 40% of the $50,000 that they short of being litigated for a year And the most that the insurance company will ever have to pay is that $1 million that they had contracted for. So those are the type of ramifications that we're going to see from this tort reform, which we're not seeing already.
And this is me, I'm just thinking in fairness, no legal, but in fairness, if I have an agreement with someone, a written agreement, and that agreement is, if I die or my wife, in this case, my spouse passes, they're going to pay me $1 million. That's what the policy is for, right? So now the company can offer me like 900,000 or something like that, and I could only, who's going to take that case? And I could only recover that 100,000. To me, what would be fair is you make them go through that rigmarole, and it's now if you lose, you should have to pay more. I mean, that's kind of in my head. You should get punished for like trying to cheat someone.
Well, at the very least, a person should be entitled to reclaim what they had to spend to get what they had contracted
Correct.
for. So what would you hear the examples coming from the other side? They talk about cases where, somebody was underpaid by $100 and ended up getting awarded $30,000 in legal fees. Yeah, it sounds on the surface, it sounds unfair, but if you're owed that extra $100,
you were shorted.
And the person you've contracted with shorted you, and you have to go spend $30,000 to recover that.
Yeah.
They should have paid you what they owed you in the first place.
Yeah. Why'd they cheat you?
That's so that's when we talk about it not even really being tort
I've paid
reform.
the premiums, right? I've been paying I have life insurance. I pay the premiums. God forbid something happens. I want to make sure my family's okay.
Right.
Now
here's the good news. New day in Tallahassee. Leadership cycles tend to last 2 years. And what we have is new leadership in the House, new leadership in the Senate that seems to understand these issues from a 30,000-foot view a lot better. Good people. Danny Perez is the new Speaker of the House, and he's just a good, fair guy who tries to find a middle road. Ben Albritton is the new Senate President. And Ben Albritton, I actually think he's a fascinating guy. Country guy, agriculture, whip smart, and has a huge heart. And maybe 3-4 years ago, kind of didn't have the exposure to our issues. As he's gotten more exposure, I think he's shown a real desire to do the right thing and to get it right. And we just went through 2 awful years. So that tort reform, we talked about one part of that bill that was real disastrous, but that was one of about 5 or 6 different parts of that bill that made insurance companies less accountable to their shareholders when their shareholders are sued, took away incentives for property owners to make their property safer, did a number of different things. Last year, what we saw, which was the second year of that cycle, was the tort reformers, the insurance industry, the big corporations. They kind of looked at that 2-year cycle, and the first year went and got everything that they felt they needed. Last year, tried to get everything that they wanted. So we saw all kinds of ridiculous bills where Penske had pushed a bill that would have made it so trucks that were older trucks that they were putting out on the road didn't have to retrofit with modern safety features. And if those trucks killed somebody or injured somebody, the lawyer for the injured victim couldn't even bring up to the jury what technology exists that they should have been using.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. There was a bill, that would have capped all medical malpractice damages. There was a horrible bill, the pesticides bill. So you've got these pesticide companies, Parquat and Roundup. A lot of them are in China that make pesticides. For instance, Parquat. They're a Chinese company that makes a pesticide that is so dangerous that it's not allowed to be used on crops in China. But of course, here we allow people to spray it on the crops and the food that we eat. Well, what this bill would have done is not only allowed them to spray it on it, but would have given them immunity all the way up the chain, up to the Chinese manufacturer who you were never going to be able to sue when those chemicals did what we know that they're going to do, which is cause people cancer, illness. There was another bad bill dealing with toxic spills. And in 2024, every bill that they introduced was defeated.
I wanted to ask you, because we're touching on something. Recently, I've taken an interest in food and all the chemicals. Like just the other day, I was talking to my son about the bread, and I was looking at bread, and I'm like, isn't bread flour, yeast, whatever, water, and I don't know, maybe something else, but I mean, just a few ingredients. And when you look at the bread that's on the shelf at the grocery store,
it's pronounced.
Yeah, it's got all these chemicals. It's like, whoa. So, and if you start looking at everything, like the coloring in Gatorade or all these different foods, like that stuff can't be healthy.
Well, even when you try to eat healthy here, you're putting so much processed stuff. You're eating a strawberry thing. Wow, this is great. But that strawberry's had chemicals spread all over it, has been genetically engineered, genetically modified so that it grows bigger. So there's corn is probably the worst offender, right? Because it's used in so many different products. We know about all the genetically modified corn. fruits, vegetables. All you have to do is go to another country for a week and eat the same thing you're eating here. And what you find is you feel less bloated, you feel less inflamed, you feel a little lighter because those chemicals in those food, which they put in because it makes it cheaper and makes it easier for them to manufacture, are killing us. We know that. Even if you try to eat organic here, you're eating something.
And there's nothing we could do.
Nothing, except keep fighting and utilize the civil justice system and make sure that the civil justice system is active and that people are able to bring these suits. And what's funny is what you find is that even the people that are the most virulent tort reformers, the ones who, they're all bottom feeders, they're all bottom dwellers, this is bad for business, there's a tort tax. When it happens to someone in their family or happens to them, all of a sudden that's the lawsuit that's not frivolous. That's the case that everybody else's case is frivolous, but my relative just went to the store and bought food. Now they've got colon cancer and there's all these things in the food and I want to bring a lawsuit. And so, you hate that it's that personal, that if it happens to me, it's justice. If it happens to anyone else, it's costing me too much money and it's wrong. But the hope is that we can keep fighting and leave the doors to the courthouse open and make sure that people have avenues to justice.
It's like, my stuff is good stuff. Your stuff is not.
It's part of a bigger problem that we probably all have, that at the end of the day, people seem to care very little about the things that don't affect them personally.
It's sad.
Yeah. But I don't know that it's really true when the world is so silly these days. You look at our politics, you look at our media. I still find that when you sit down with people face to face, you could have different political persuasion, different background. People still generally want the same things, still generally believe in the same things, still generally can form friendships. And I think it's the same on that level too. I think even while people might, hear about something, not realize it affects them. But when people sit down at a person-to-person level and make that connection, a lot of that other stuff goes out the window.
Yeah, that's a shame about the food. It's been in my head lately. I've been looking at all those chemicals and I'm like, this is not good.
You're about to be the next Morgan Spurlock, right? Supersize me.
Yeah, I'm just like, you talk to people, when I was on vacation in wherever, Italy, France, Spain, whatever. And it's like, I had all the bread I wanted. I had all this and, I felt different.
Right, you can go to Italy and eat 3 bowls of pasta a day and you leave there feeling light and ready to go.
Ready to go. Here you eat that and you're...
Right, you're lying down for 3
hours. Yeah, it's true. So Todd, after talking about all this stuff that's been going on, what do you see on the horizon? Legislatively. So
I think there's 2 different ways to look at that. I always think that our ultimate responsibility is do no harm. And, in talking about this, I say time and time again, rocks don't roll uphill. And what I mean by that is once a right is chipped away, it's hard to get it back. You very rarely see legislation passed and then the legislature turns around and says, you know what, we want to make it easier to sue corporations, give people more rights. You just generally don't see that. Maybe one day the pendulum will swing, probably not in my lifetime. So, the first question is, can we play perfect defense like we did last session and make sure that any bad legislation that pops up because Penske doesn't want to get sued when their trucks kill somebody or this pesticide manufacturer kills somebody, can we stop those bills from getting passed? And frankly, I think that the environment that we're in is a lot of the legislatures feel that they were put in a bad position on a lot of the tort reform bills. I don't think there's much of an appetite to do more tort reform right now, in large part because a lot of people look at the environment and don't see any positive changes from the last, just keep hearing, it's going to take time, it's going to take time.
Sure.
Right? That's always the thing. Next year, check back with us.
Yeah.
Now, that doesn't mean there's not going to be bad bills. There's absolutely going to be bad bills, but I think that we've got a very good and sophisticated legislature right now who understands what a lot of these dynamics are and why they're being told the things that they're being told. So while I never want to promise anything, and while anything can always go wrong, and you get up to Tallahassee and things get caught in that grand bargain, and something that you don't think is going to passes, I think there's a reason for cautious optimism that there's not going to be too much bad. I think there is some potential for some proactive legislation. And, I don't necessarily think that's because we're behind things, but I think that there's a lot of issues that we've gotten behind because they're good ideas that initially there was hesitance to because the insurance companies or the corporations were pushing so hard against it that over time people have started to realize are good ideas. And I'll give you an example. Mandatory bodily injury coverage. Of course it's the right thing, right? If somebody's going to be driving a car on the road, they should have adequate insurance to deal with the situation if they hurt somebody. I think that, at first the insurance companies were resistant to it because this was a trial lawyer idea. But the reality is it's a good idea. we shouldn't be one of the few states in the country where you can drive around without bodily injury insurance or just have PIP, particularly now that PIP is, you can't even really enforce it. And I think they've also tried to see, looking at it from what matters to them is, wait, if there's mandatory bodily injury, that means we're selling a lot more auto policies. So I do think that there's some chance that some stuff like that we've put out into the universe that other people have looked at and realized this is a good idea may pass. Again, I wouldn't hold my breath for anything, because that still means you need to have the House, the Senate, and the governor. And I don't know that the governor's going to sign anything that increases cause of action or increases insurance limits. But if the number one goal is to not see bad legislation, I think we're in a pretty good position that if the session goes right, we can hopefully get through the session without any damage being done.
Todd, it's been great learning about all of this stuff. If someone wants to get a hold of you, how would they go about doing that?
Absolutely. They should call my friend Braulio and tell him to have me get on display. I'd like to give everyone my cell phone. I think it's the easiest way. And in today's world, there's an expectation. My cell is 305-775-0339. My firm's website is www.haggardlawfirm.com, Haggard.
In your email.
Lawfirm.com. That was my last part. Is T Michaels, TMICHAELS at haggardlawfirm.com.
Todd, thank you for coming. It's been great hanging out and learning about this stuff.
It was a pleasure. It even made the drive worth it. Thanks, Braulio.